Honey. Welcome to Journey to Peace, y'all. This is episode 2, and true to my word, none other than my other half, Gibson, is joining us today. Welcome, honey.
Welcome. I'm happy to be here.
We today are continuing this journey through the ups and downs of life, and we're just inviting you to join us in that. And we're praying our steps lead us to peace. And so that's the conversation we're going to be having today, especially as it relates to failure. Now, honey, I was looking in your book, Staying Positive in a Negative World, and it's such an encouragement for the season that so many of us are walking in this life, not just what's happening out in the world, but what's happening in personal lives. You know, I've gone through a recent transition and journey. Obviously, you've been walking alongside me with that. And so your chapter in this book about failure, and you actually call it failure as a prerequisite for success,
Yes.
caught my eye because I was like, so often, you know, something that robs us of peace in our journey is that we think once something has gone awry or there's some type of failure in our life that somehow things are over, that it's this mistake, you know, in the moment we feel like, how is this part of the journey? It feels like this is an obstacle to my journey and not something that's really a part of it.
Absolutely. And the only person that has never made a mistake is Jesus Christ. So if your name is not Jesus Christ, you've made mistakes and you've had failure. So the thing is how we've been encultured, how we've been raised, how we've been brought up, even the schooling system. It teaches people that, hey, if you fail, you get an F, and there's a negative emotion attached to it. There's a negative connotation attached to it, which brings people down so bad emotionally. But what if we looked at our failures as lessons? What if we looked at our failures as ways that is teaching us how we can improve and how we can get better? And I think that's a different perspective to have. And so many times when I talk to people, when I'm coaching people, and they want to tell me about their failures and how their lives are over and they made this mistake. And sometimes that failure comes in the form of a business failure. Sometimes that failure comes in the form of them failing in their academics. Sometimes that failure comes with respect to a relationship that didn't work out. And so I always like to say, you failed at business, but you're not a failure. The relationship may have failed, but you're not a failure. So we have to detach our identities to what happened. And so many times we attach our identities to the mistakes or to the shortcomings or to the setbacks that have happened. And I always like to say a setback is only a setup for a comeback.
I know you love that. All right, so one of these quotes kind of goes right along with it. You say Mel Ziegler, who is the founder of and CEO of Banana Republic, says, by seeing the seed of failure in every success, we remain humble. By seeing the seed of success in every failure, we remain hopeful. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And in your book, you actually give us some profiles in failure to kind of prove your point.
Yes.
So one person you talk about is Phineas Taylor Barnum. That's probably a new name for most of our listeners today.
Yes, that's the gentleman that pioneered the circus industry in America, who was one of the first people to make over $1 million in the circus industry. And why don't you explain how he failed?
Well, what happened was he actually went bankrupt, and the bankruptcy is what led him to start the Ringling Brother and Barnum and Bailey Circus. And so where he could have failed and said, well, I guess this isn't what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to just, pack up and go home. He said, why don't I reimagine my vision and take it to the next level?
And that's so wise and so sagacious that you said that with respect to failure. Failure is just a guidepost that is telling you need to just switch it up. You need to just pivot. And even the platform that we're even on right now, YouTube. Did you know that YouTube started off as a dating site where people could upload their dating videos? Ooh, they want to look all fancy and, all, made up and did up. And they raised money for it, several $1,000,000. It was an absolute flop. It was an absolute failure. And then one of the founders was looking and they said, hey, we're not getting the level of traction that we thought. But oh my goodness, I'm noticing that people uploading little cat videos. That's in that era when cat videos were so popular, and just random, comedy videos that people were uploading. Those were getting a lot of engagement. Those were getting a lot of views. And so one of them said, "Why don't we just take the aspect of dating out of it and just put it on as a platform so that people can just post video like any old random Joe can post videos. The rest is history."
The rest is history. So the platform we're on right now began with a totally different vision. That didn't work out. So they were able to pivot. I
Correct.
like that word pivot. There's a lot of jokes about it. There's a comedy show that, made a big deal about that word pivot in one of their scenes. And it's kind of an iconic comedy sketch in our culture. But really talk to us about that word pivot, because in life, we're going to have to do that. I'm literally working in that zone right now. So what does it mean for us to pivot?
Well, pivoting is, I grew up playing a lot of sports, and one of the sports that I played and participated in is boxing. And so when you're boxing, you have to learn to pivot, because if you don't pivot fast enough, you're going to get a punch right in the face or in the gut or whatever. So in boxing, you learn to pivot. You learn to pivot. And as you get a little bit more seasoned, as you get a little bit more wiser as a boxer, what you find is you get to the point where you can anticipate where the punches are going to come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of the human experience where we can learn to anticipate that, listen, that things won't always go our way. So when things are starting to not go your way, or you actually do get a punch, you can now use that data, use that knowledge, and be able to pivot before you get knocked out, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So life presents a lot of punches, and we just got to pivot. And when you pivot, you're pivoting with the lessons that you've learned from that failure, or what I like to call that lesson, and it gives you what I call the competitive advantage.
Hmm. So let's make it a little bit even more personal as we talk
Yes.
about, the failures we go through in life. And, it's fair game. I'll share something from my life too. But I want to ask you, is there a time where you felt, man, this was a failure? This was a letdown. And how did you pivot? How did you use that failure to kind of springboard to a new season?
Well, I think, wow, I have so many that I can say this was a failure, that was a failure. But if I could think of one thing, I would say is there was actually a particular business that I started that I thought was going to go very well, um, but it didn't go as planned. And it was actually a vending machine business that I thought this was going to be a home run, this was going to go well, but it didn't go as planned. So what I learned, which was a really good thing, was I learned that I learned a lot about retail. I learned a lot about sales, but what I also learned that in that business, I had to deal with a lot of people. And I learned through that business that I was good at that very thing, working with people, but in a different dynamic. So that failure served as a lesson, and that lesson turned into a blessing because, like I said, when I work with people, there's a certain level of anointing, there's a certain level of leadership, there's a certain level of serving and serving others that I've learned is one of my superpowers.
Mm. Yeah, and I've seen that in your life. Your superpower is really the way you are able to connect.
Exactly,
Yeah, connect with
exactly.
people and speak into their life. As many of you who are watching may realize that I've been in radio for a number of years, actually a couple of decades. And I remember early on, it was always my vision, it was always my dream to be, on the on-air aspect of radio. But when I started very early on, it was really all behind the scenes in operations, which, was great because I learned the ins and outs and the nitty gritty, earned my stripes, all of those things. And then there was an opportunity early on to do a 1 hour local show in the afternoon. And we even called it Primetime South Florida. And it was kind of a rebranding of some of the things we did at the radio station earlier in the day, cutting up different interviews, but also have music on the ride home for people, rebranding it, kind of packaging some of the content we were already creating. And so that was kind of my first foray. In fact, I remember the very first day, my station manager, who was also a mentor who was training me, was literally kind of standing off to the side, like, okay, are you ready? And I would turn on the mic and I would, start my show. And she was right there. As soon as the mic went off, she's like, okay, great. Okay, you're doing great. Now, here's what we're going to do next. And so I just remember being so nervous on that first day, but finally, started to get the hang of it, and things were, I think, starting to get my legs underneath me. And then probably I want to say about a year into it, we're part of a network, and the corporate leaders decided, that hour that we have locally for all these different stations, we're actually going to take that hour and give it to a national host. And so I lost that local hour, and I remember being so discouraged, like, okay, am I just going to go back to just doing the behind the scenes operations and not have this on air opportunity? Because that's kind of like the point of why I'm here, right? As far as why I desire to be here. And I remember being so discouraged in that moment of failure, in that moment of disappointment, and just praying and seeking God, saying, what am I doing here? Like, what's the point of this? If this failure happened, why? And I remember reading scripture, and there was this verse that popped out at me that I'm sure I had read before, but it had never sunk into my heart and soul like it did on this day. And the verse is Galatians 6, verse 9. And it says, do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. And when I read that, I just felt like the Lord was saying, don't give up. I have something for you here. Don't be discouraged. Don't let this failure, don't let this setback take you out. I have something for you if you keep going and if you don't give up. And so I did. And I wasn't back on the air regularly for another 7 years. It was another 7 years of mostly just behind the scenes work before I had another on air regular part of a show. And so, and even a few years after that, before I was the on-air host. And so it is so easy to give up when things don't go according to plan, when you see things as a failure. But we'll reap a harvest, Galatians 6, verse 9 says, if we don't give up.
Yes, yes. And I think that that resilience, that resilience of, you know, Henry Ford saying that he just kept on going to find another way, find another path. And, a lot of times when we look at social media or we look at the internet, everybody always shows their successes. And it just looks like everything is perfect. They show that they have the perfect family, the perfect vacation, the perfect everything. But in reality, it's not like that. It isn't like that. In fact, life can be challenging in many respects. But when you're looking only at people's highlight reels, that can be a way to take away your peace, you know? And I have the opportunity to coach different people in different aspects of their lives. Some are what you would consider just everyday, ordinary people. Some are considered, famous people and that aspect of things. And sometimes I realize that what the public is seeing and what is actually behind the scenes is not actually the truth. Because sometimes people in the public or leaders or, people that are up front, they have a public face, but they're, as what the poet once said, they live lives of quiet desperation. So internally, they're bleeding. Internally, they're going through hell and they are just failing, but they have to put up that face that they're not. And so I think that, you know, we need to create spaces for each other to say, hey, every single thing that you do is not going to be a home run. In fact, when you look at Babe Ruth, who is considered the greatest baseball player of all time, he had more strikeouts than he had home runs. He has the record of the most strikeouts. So, but he's considered the greatest. So, somebody once said, if you want to double or if you want to increase your success rate, double your failure rate. So, the path to success goes through the street of failure. I said the path of success goes through the street of failure. Embrace it, hold it, but know that only you can defeat it.
In fact, one of the ways you end the chapter in your book, Staying Positive in Negative World, is you said failure is like fertilizer, right? It stinks. Nobody wants it, but you need it to grow.
Exactly. Exactly. It is a fertilizer. It is a fertilizer. And I think that we're living in a time in where people, they are trying their hardest and people are giving it 100%, and they're going after their goals, and they're being there for their families, they're being there for their companies. And what do you do when you give everything and it still seems not to add up? What do you do? And some people can tend to get discouraged. Some people can tend to feel like a malcontent, and they get down and in despair. And my message to you is, when you feel like you are failing or you feel like you're drowning, hang in there. Hang in there. And in boxing, when you're getting pelted, you get to a point where you're just getting pelted and pelted, and your mind is just in a daze because they're just hitting you and hitting you. And the coach would yell, hang on to the ropes, hang on to the ropes. Because as long as you hang on to the ropes, you're not down. And it's not over until you win. My good friend Les Brown, my good friend and mentor Les Brown always says, it's not over until you win. It's not over until you win. And the victory you're gonna snatch from the jaws of defeat.
Isn't he the one that says if you fall back, what is that?
He says Les always says this. He says if you fall down, make sure you fall down on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. And I think when you're going through the difficult times, when you're going through the quote unquote failures, you have to get to that place and that point in your life where you feed your mind with scripture, you feed your mind with positive thoughts, you feed your mind with positive people that have positive energy, that gives you positive strength. You need that. Don't surround yourself with things that pull you down. And movement helps too. Mm-hmm. Being able to move around,
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been an encouraging conversation for me, for hopefully for you, and hopefully for you too. And so much of kind of what started this conversation is found right here in Gibson's book, Staying Positive in a Negative World. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. And just thank you so much for joining us today on this Journey to Peace podcast with Gibson and Bridget. Thanks for tuning in to today's Journey to Peace with Gibson and Bridget. There's more to come, but in the meantime, let me recommend one of Gibson's books to you. It's called Staying Positive in a Negative World. Just because the world is full of negativity doesn't mean you need to be. There's a link to this book in the show notes. We'll see you next time.